In June of 2015, a 24-year-old woman named Alicia Renault launched a sea kayak into the waters of Glacier Bay, Alaska, told the ranger at Bartlett Cove she'd be back in 5 days, and paddled north into some of the most remote coastline on the continent. She did not come back in 5 days. She did not come back in 5 weeks. 2 years later, a geological survey team entered a sea cave on the western shore of the bay and found her sitting cross-legged on a rock ledge 15 feet above the tide line, braiding her own hair. She was alive. She was calm. She looked up at them without surprise, as if she'd been expecting company, and said 4 words that none of them have been able to explain or forget. "You're early this time, but we're getting ahead of ourselves." Welcome back to another video on my channel. To protect the victims, the names and places in this story have been slightly changed. If you have a story of your own to share, make sure to do so using the link down below. If you enjoy the video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Alicia Renault grew up in Duluth, Minnesota, on the western tip of Lake Superior, in a house where the water was visible from every window. Her mother, Colleen, was a public librarian. Her father, Gage, repaired commercial fishing boats, a trade he'd inherited from his own father, and practiced with a kind of grim devotion that Alicia once described as love that looks like stubbornness. She had one sibling, an older brother named Theo, who'd moved to Portland after college and called home on Sundays reliably at 4 o'clock. The Renaults were not adventurous people. They were steady people. Colleen kept a garden that produced the same vegetables every year: tomatoes, zucchini, snap peas, dill. And she rotated nothing. Gage owned one coat for every purpose: work, church, weather. Theo had lived in the same apartment for 6 years. They were a family that found comfort in repetition and knowing what came next. Alicia was different, not dramatically different. She wasn't the wild child, wasn't the rebel. She was quiet about it, the way she was quiet about most things. But anyone paying attention could see that she was restless in a way the rest of her family was not. She read books about polar expeditions when she was 12. She taught herself to identify edible plants from a field guide she'd found at a garage sale. She spent a summer volunteering at a raptor rehabilitation center and came home smelling like raw meat and feathers, grinning in a way that made Colleen nervous. She wasn't reckless, Colleen would say later, choosing the word carefully. She was pulled, like there was something out there calling her name and the rest of us just couldn't hear it. After graduating from the University of Minnesota with a degree in ecology, Alicia spent 2 years working seasonal jobs: trail crew in the Cascades, biological survey work in the Boundary Waters, a winter spent counting salmon on a research vessel in the Gulf of Alaska. She lived out of a duffel bag in a Subaru with 200,000 miles on it. She called home on Wednesdays, not Sundays, and sometimes she forgot. She wasn't running from anything, Theo said. She was running toward something. I just don't think she knew what it was. In early 2015, Alicia applied for and received a backcountry permit for a solo kayaking trip in Glacier Bay National Park and Preserve. She'd been planning it for months, studying charts, researching tidal patterns, assembling gear with the meticulous care of someone who understood that preparation was the price of admission to places where mistakes could kill you. She told her mother she'd be gone a week. "Just paddling," she said on the phone. "Camping on beaches, watching glaciers calve. It's not dangerous, Mom. People do it all the time. People do, in fact, do it all the time." Glacier Bay receives thousands of visitors every summer, many of them kayakers, and the Park Service manages a well-organized permit system for backcountry camping. Rangers conduct orientations, routes are discussed, expected return dates are logged. But Glacier Bay is also 3.3 million acres of tidewater glaciers, temperate rainforest, and coastline, so folded and fjorded that a person could spend a lifetime exploring and never see the same shoreline twice. The water temperature hovers around 40 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to kill an unprotected swimmer in minutes. The weather changes without warning. Fog rolls in like a wall. Winds funnel down glacial valleys at speeds that can flip a loaded kayak. And rain is not a possibility, but a certainty. Relentless and horizontal, the kind that finds every seam in every layer you're wearing. It is spectacularly beautiful. It is also spectacularly indifferent to whether you survive it. Alicia arrived in Gustavus, the tiny gateway community of 500 people that serves as the land-based access point to Glacier Bay, on June 8, 2015. She stayed one night at a hostel where the owner, a woman named Bridget Tillman, remembered her clearly. "Quiet girl," Bridget told the Park Service later, kept to herself. Had all her gear organized in these color-coded dry bags. I remember thinking, okay, she knows what she's doing. Some people show up here with garbage bags and cotton sleeping bags, and you just pray for them. She wasn't like that. Bridget also remembered something else. She had a notebook, not like a journal, more like a research notebook, the kind with the grid paper. She was writing in it at the kitchen table that night, and I glanced over, not snooping, just curious. And it was all drawings, not maps exactly, more like patterns, spirals and lines and these repeating shapes. I asked her what they were, and she said, tidal charts. But they didn't look like any tidal chart I've ever seen, and I've lived here 19 years. The next morning, June 9th, Alicia checked in at the Bartlett Cove Ranger Station for her backcountry orientation. The ranger who conducted it was a seasonal employee named Duncan Oakes, 28, on his third summer in the park. He walked her through the standard protocol: camping locations, bear safety, tidal awareness, weather contingencies, expected check-in schedule. She was attentive, Oakes recalled, asked good questions, knew her gear. I had zero concerns about her competency. The only thing that struck me as unusual, she asked about caves. Alicia wanted to know about the sea caves along the western shore of the bay, specifically in the area around Kayaker Inlet and the Marble Islands. Were they accessible by kayak? Were they mapped? Had anyone surveyed them recently? I told her the caves weren't really part of the standard kayaking route, Oakes said. They're tide dependent. Some of them are fully submerged at high water, and the currents around the inlet mouths can be unpredictable. I told her to steer clear. He paused. She nodded, like she was listening. But there was something in her eyes. I don't know how to describe it, like she'd already decided. Like the caves were the whole reason she was here, and the rest of it, the glaciers, the camping, the kayaking, was just the frame around the picture. Alicia listed her return date as June 14th, 5 days from launch. She signed the permit. She loaded her kayak. Duncan Oakes watched her paddle out from Bartlett Cove and turn north, her stroke steady and efficient, her loaded boat sitting low in the gray water. I watched until she rounded the point, he said. Then I went back inside and logged her departure. That was it. I didn't think about her again until she didn't come back. To understand what happened next, or more precisely, what didn't happen, what absence shaped the weeks and months that followed, you need to understand Glacier Bay not as a destination, but as an environment. Not the postcard version, not the cruise ship from a distance version, but the version that exists when you are alone in a 17-foot kayak on water that could kill you, under a sky that changes its mind every 30 minutes, surrounded by landscape that was under a mile of ice 400 years ago, and still hasn't decided what it wants to be. The bay is young. Geologically, ecologically, it is an infant. The glaciers that carved it retreated so recently that the land is still rising, rebounding from the weight of all that ice, gaining an inch of elevation every year. The forests along the lower bay are less than 2 centuries old. The upper bay is raw rock, freshly exposed, colonized by moss and alder, and not much else. The water is silty with glacial flour, ground rock so fine it stays suspended, turning the sea an opaque blue-gray that reveals nothing of what lies beneath. This is a landscape in the act of becoming. Nothing is settled, nothing is finished. The glaciers are still calving, house-sized chunks of ice breaking free with a sound like cannon fire, sending waves across the water that can swamp a boat a quarter-mile away. The tides are enormous, swinging 20 feet or more between high and low, exposing vast mudflats and boulder fields that vanish again 6 hours later. The weather is governed by the collision of maritime and glacial air masses, producing fog so dense you can lose sight of your own bow, rain so persistent it becomes the default state of existence, and occasional windows of sun so brilliant and unexpected that they feel hallucinatory. It is, by any measure, one of the most dynamic and unpredictable environments on Earth. People go there to feel small. Most of them succeed. Alicia paddled north on the morning of June 9th. Based on her filed itinerary, she planned to camp the first night at Sandy Cove, roughly 12 miles up the west shore, then continue north over the following days, exploring the coastline before turning back south on day 4. She never checked in. The park's backcountry check-in system in 2015 was not real-time. Kayakers were expected to return by their listed date, at which point they'd check in with the ranger station. If they were overdue, the park initiated a protocol. First, a waiting period of 24 hours to account for weather delays, then radio contact attempts, then aerial search. Alicia's return date was June 14th. She didn't appear. On June 15th, Ranger Duncan Oakes flagged her as overdue. He wasn't alarmed yet. Weather delays were common, and a strong paddler could easily lose a day to wind or fog and still be fine. By June 16th, when she still hadn't appeared and couldn't be raised on the marine radio channel she'd been given, the park initiated a formal search. Here is what they found. Nothing. A Coast Guard helicopter flew the west shore from Bartlett Cove to the upper bay. 2 patrol boats swept the coastline. Rangers checked every designated camping area along her planned route. They found no kayak, no camp, no gear, no trace. That was the part that didn't make sense, said Park Service investigator Maren Halverson, who was called in from the regional office in Juneau on day 3 of the search. A kayak is 17 feet long and bright yellow. Gear is colorful. Even if something catastrophic happened, a capsize, a wave, a bear encounter, there should have been debris, a paddle, a dry bag, a PFD washed up on a beach somewhere. We found absolutely nothing. The search expanded. Aircraft covered the east shore, the islands, the inlet mouths. Boats probed the coves and passages that were too narrow for the helicopter to survey effectively. Divers checked the water near known hazard points, rocky headlands where currents could pin a capsized kayaker underwater. Nothing. I've worked searches where we don't find the person, Halverson said, but I've never worked a search where we don't find anything. This water is cold enough to preserve gear indefinitely. Dry bags float. Kayaks don't just vanish. Even if she went in the water and drowned, the boat would still be out there somewhere. Colleen and Gage Renault flew to Juneau on June 18th. Theo drove up from Portland. They sat in the park headquarters at Bartlett Cove and listened to Halverson describe the search parameters, the assets deployed, the areas covered. Colleen brought a photograph of Alicia, not the one from her driver's license, which made her look startled and pale, but one from the previous Christmas. In it, Alicia is sitting on the floor of the Duluth house, wrapping a gift, her dark hair falling across her face, laughing at something outside the frame. She is wearing a flannel shirt that was probably her father's. She looks exactly like what she was, a young woman with her whole life ahead of her, caught in a moment of uncomplicated joy. Colleen placed the photograph on the table during the briefing, between the topographic maps and the search grid overlays, and didn't explain why. She didn't need to. It sat there for the rest of the meeting, Alicia's laughing face looking up at the fluorescent lights while the adults in the room discussed the statistical probability that she was still alive. We hadn't given up hope, Halverson was careful to say. The terrain in Glacier Bay is incredibly complex. There are hundreds of places a person could shelter, overhangs, caves, dense forest. If she'd made it to shore and was injured, or if her kayak was damaged, she could be surviving but unable to signal. That was the working theory. The working theory sustained them for 2 weeks. Rangers on foot searched the shoreline, mile by mile, calling her name. Volunteers from Gustavus joined the effort. A specialized K9 team was flown in from Anchorage. The dogs worked the beaches and tree lines with focused intensity, but picked up no scent. On July 1st, 22 days after Alicia's departure, the active search was scaled back. Not suspended. Halverson was clear about that. Scaled back. Rangers would continue to monitor the backcountry. Any hikers or kayakers entering the area were asked to report anything unusual. The Coast Guard maintained a lookout advisory, but the helicopters stopped flying. The boats returned to their regular patrols. The K9 team went home. Alicia Renault was classified as a missing person, presumed dead by misadventure. Gage Renault went home to Duluth after the active search ended. He went back to repairing boats. Colleen told friends he didn't talk about Alicia, not because he'd accepted her death, but because speaking about her in the past tense was something his mouth refused to do, and speaking about her in the present tense was something his mind refused to allow. He was caught between grammars, and so he said nothing. Colleen did not go home, not right away. She stayed in Gustavus for 3 more weeks, living at Bridget Tillman's hostel, paying the weekly rate, making herself small and useful, washing dishes, sweeping the common room, helping Bridget with breakfast for the summer guests who came and went, cheerful and sunburned, on their way to see glaciers. Every morning, Colleen walked to the ranger station and asked if there was any news. Every morning, the answer was no. She'd nod, thank them, walk back to the hostel. In the afternoons, she sat on the dock at Bartlett Cove and looked north, across the water, toward the part of the bay where her daughter had gone. I couldn't leave, Colleen said later. If I left, it meant she was gone. As long as I was there, it meant someone was still waiting for her, and I thought maybe if I waited long enough, she'd just come paddling around the point, like she'd lost track of time, like she'd say, "Sorry, Mom, I found the most incredible cave," and I'd be furious and relieved and we'd go home. Bridget Tillman watched this without commenting. She'd lived in Gustavus long enough to know that the bay took people sometimes, and that the families of the taken had their own timelines for grief. You didn't rush it. You didn't tell them what to feel. You washed the dishes and kept the coffee hot and let them be. But there was something about Colleen that bothered me, Bridget admitted. Not bothered. That's not the right word. Unsettled me. She wasn't grieving the way people usually do. She wasn't crying much, wasn't falling apart. She was listening, like she could hear something the rest of us couldn't. She'd tilt her head sometimes, out on the dock, the way a dog does when it catches a frequency beyond human range. And she'd get this look. Not hopeful exactly, more like confirmed. Like whatever she was hearing matched what she expected. On the 4th week, Colleen started asking questions that the rangers found unusual. She wanted to know about the Tlingit. Specifically, she wanted to know about the Huna Tlingit, the indigenous people who had occupied Glacier Bay for thousands of years before the glacial advance pushed them south in the 1700s, and who had returned when the ice retreated, only to be displaced again when the area became a national monument in 1925. She wanted to know about their stories, their names for places, their understanding of the caves. Maren Halverson, who was still loosely overseeing the case from Juneau, learned about these questions and drove back to Gustavus. I sat down with Colleen and asked her directly what she was looking for, Halverson said. I expected her to say something about closure, about understanding the landscape where her daughter had died. That's common. Families want to know the place, want to be able to picture it. But Colleen said something I wasn't prepared for. She said, "I don't think Alicia is dead. I think she found what she was looking for." I asked her what that meant. She opened her purse and took out a notebook, Alicia's notebook, the one with the grid paper. Colleen had found it in Alicia's car, which was still parked at the Bartlett Cove lot. It hadn't been collected as evidence because at that point there was no evidence of a crime, just a missing kayaker. She opened it to a page near the back and turned it toward me. Halverson paused here in the interview she gave years later and rubbed her eyes the way a person does when they're deciding how much to reveal. It was drawings, like what Bridget had described, spirals, patterns, repeating geometric shapes. But the page Colleen showed me also had writing, small, careful handwriting, very precise. And it described something that, look, I'm an investigator. I deal in evidence and probability. I'm not a superstitious person. But what Alicia had written in that notebook made the hair on my arms stand up. And when I looked at Colleen, this steady librarian mother from Duluth, Minnesota, she was nodding, like she could see it happening to me. Like she'd felt the same thing and was waiting for someone else to feel it too. Halverson wouldn't describe the notebook's contents in that initial interview. She said it was evidence in an ongoing missing persons case, which was technically true. She said it required context, which was also true. What she didn't say, what she would only reveal much later, was that Alicia's notebook contained detailed descriptions of a specific sea cave on the western shore of Glacier Bay. Not a cave that appeared on any geological survey, not a cave that the Park Service had mapped or named, a cave that, according to every chart and aerial photograph Halverson could find, did not exist. Alicia had drawn it from multiple angles. She'd estimated its dimensions. She'd noted the tidal patterns that would expose its entrance, a window, she calculated, of roughly 90 minutes at the lowest point of the most extreme minus tides, which occurred only a few times each summer. And she'd written in that small, careful hand a single sentence that Colleen had underlined with a trembling finger. The shepherds say it keeps what it's given, and it gives back what it keeps, but never the same. There was no attribution, no source, no explanation of who the shepherds were, or what they were shepherding, or what the cave kept, or what it gave back, or what never the same meant, just that sentence. And beneath it, a date, June 11th, 2015, 2 days after Alicia had paddled north into Glacier Bay and vanished from the known world. Colleen returned to Duluth in August of 2015. She brought the notebook with her. She'd made copies of every page and left one set with Halverson and another with Bridget Tillman for reasons she didn't fully explain. "I want someone here to have it," she told Bridget, "in case someone comes looking." "Looking for what?" Bridget asked. Colleen considered this for a long time. "For the entrance," she said, "when the tide is right." Life, as it does, continued. The Renaults absorbed their loss in their separate ways. Gage repaired boats. Theo called on Sundays at 4. Colleen went back to the library, shelving books with the same careful precision she'd always shown. And if her colleagues noticed that she'd begun requesting interlibrary loans on subjects far outside her usual interests, ethnographic studies of the Tlingit, geological surveys of Southeast Alaska, an obscure 1940s monograph on tidal caves of the North Pacific, they chalked it up to grief wearing the costume of research. People cope in their own ways. The case stayed open, but motionless. Halverson filed her report, missing Kayaker, presumed drowning, no evidence of foul play, no remains recovered. The report was thorough, factual, and 12 pages long. It did not mention the notebook. It did not mention the cave that didn't exist. It did not mention the shepherds. Halverson told herself this was because the notebook was irrelevant to the material investigation. The scribblings of a young woman with an active imagination didn't change the fact that Glacier Bay's waters were cold and its tides unforgiving. She told herself the notebook was a distraction, a grief trap for a mother who couldn't accept the obvious. She almost convinced herself. But at night sometimes, lying in her apartment in Juneau with the rain on the windows, that Southeast Alaska rain that never really stops, that becomes the background frequency of your life. Halverson would find herself thinking about the sentence, "The shepherds say it keeps what it's given." What kind of mind produces that? Not a delusion. Delusions are messy, inconsistent. Alicia's notebook was meticulous. The drawings were precise. The tidal calculations, when Halverson checked them against NOAA data, were accurate to within minutes. Whatever Alicia believed she'd found, she'd done the work to find it. And then there was the other thing. The thing Halverson hadn't put in her report and hadn't told anyone, not even her supervisor. When she'd checked the tidal data for June 11th, 2015, the date written beneath the sentence about the shepherds, she discovered that it coincided with one of the lowest tides of the year, a minus 4.2-foot tide occurring at 3:47 a.m., during which the extreme low water would have exposed coastline and cave entrances normally submerged under 10 or 15 feet of seawater. A 90-minute window, just as Alicia had calculated. Halverson stared at the NOAA chart for a long time. Then she closed her laptop, turned off the light, and listened to the rain. She didn't check the tidal charts again for almost 2 years. She wishes she had. Time passed. The bay didn't notice. Glaciers calved. Tides swung through their enormous cycles. Bears fished the salmon streams. Humpback whales returned each summer to feed in the nutrient-rich waters, their breath visible for miles, those great exhalations that look like signals meant for someone, if only you knew the language. Bridget Tillman kept running the hostel. Every summer, kayakers came through, young, bright-eyed, loaded with gear and confidence, and she watched them paddle out from Bartlett Cove and tried not to think about Alicia Renault. She kept the copy of Alicia's notebook in a drawer beneath the front desk, under the guest registration forms and the takeout menus for the 2 restaurants in Gustavus. Sometimes, late in the evening, after the guests had gone to bed, Bridget would take it out and look at the drawings, the spirals, the geometric patterns, the careful tidal calculations. She'd lived in Gustavus for over 2 decades. She knew the bay as well as any non-indigenous person could. She'd kayaked its waters, hiked its shores, watched its glaciers retreat year after year like something withdrawing from a conversation. And she knew, had always known, in the way that long-term residents of wild places know things they don't discuss at dinner parties, that the bay had qualities that didn't show up on charts, sounds that carried wrong, fog that behaved with what felt like intention, places along the western shore where the water changed color for no discernible reason, not gradually, the way water does when depth changes or sediment shifts, but abruptly, in a hard line, as if 2 different bodies of water were pressed against each other and refusing to mix. She'd mentioned these things to the Park Service once, years ago, and been told about glacial meltwater and thermoclines and haloclines, the perfectly rational explanations that perfectly rational people provide for phenomena they haven't personally witnessed. Bridget had nodded and not brought it up again. Now, looking at Alicia's drawings, she felt something she hadn't expected. Not recognition exactly, more like the sensation of finding a word for something she'd always felt, but never named. As if Alicia's careful spirals and geometric shapes were a language that described the bay Bridget actually lived in. Not the one in the brochures, not the one in the geological surveys, but the one that existed at 3 in the morning when the tide was impossibly low, and the silence had a texture like velvet, and the western shore seemed, for just a moment, to be breathing. She never told anyone this. She put the notebook back in the drawer. She went to bed, but she started checking the tidal charts. In March of 2017, 21 months after Alicia Renault's disappearance, a 3-person geological survey team from the University of Alaska Fairbanks submitted a permit request to the Park Service for a 10-day research expedition along the western shore of Glacier Bay. They were mapping coastal erosion patterns and studying the impact of glacial retreat on littoral cave formations. Cave formations. The team was led by Dr. Petra Sorensen, a geomorphologist in her 50s with a particular interest in sea caves, how they form, how they change, how glacial and tidal forces create structures that don't appear in any textbook because they exist for such brief geological moments that no one has time to study them before they collapse or transform into something else. Glacier Bay is one of the only places on Earth where you can watch landscape being born in real time, Sorensen wrote in her permit application. The caves along the western shore are especially dynamic, formed by the interaction of tidal erosion and isostatic rebound. They're literally changing shape year to year. Some of them may have existed for less than a century. Some of them may not exist 10 years from now. The permit was approved. The team arrived in Gustavus in late May 2017, where they stayed, as many researchers did, at Bridget Tillman's hostel. Bridget said nothing about Alicia. She said nothing about the notebook. She served breakfast and answered questions about boat launches and weather patterns and kept her counsel. But the night before the team departed, as Dr. Sorensen sat in the common room reviewing nautical charts, Bridget brought her a cup of tea and lingered. "You're studying the caves," Bridget said. "The western shore formations, yes. The ones that appear and disappear with the tides." Sorensen looked up, interested. "You know about them?" "I've lived here 23 years. I know the water does things out there that don't match what people expect." Sorensen set down her pencil. "What kind of things?" Bridget hesitated. She was not, by nature, a person who shared hunches with scientists, but something about Sorensen's face, patient, curious, unafraid of the answer, reminded her of Alicia sitting at this same table 2 years earlier, drawing spirals on grid paper. "There was a girl," Bridget said, "a kayaker. She went missing in 2015. She was looking for a cave, a specific one she'd researched. She had drawings, calculations. The Park Service searched for weeks and found nothing. Not her, not her boat, not a single piece of gear." Sorensen was listening with the attentiveness of someone who recognizes the approach of relevant information. "I have a copy of her notebook," Bridget said. "Would you like to see it?" What Petra Sorensen saw in Alicia Renault's notebook changed the trajectory of her research trip, though she would later downplay this in her official report. She spent 2 hours at the kitchen table, turning pages, occasionally making a sound, not quite a word, more like a hum of recognition, the sound a person makes when a puzzle piece they didn't know was missing slides into place. "The drawings aren't artistic," Sorensen told her team the next morning, choosing her words with academic care. "They're schematic." She was mapping something, a cave system clearly, but the geometry is unusual. The proportions don't match any standard erosional cave formation. If these drawings are accurate and her tidal calculations suggest she was meticulous, then she was describing a structure that shouldn't exist. Not in sedimentary rock, not in metamorphic, not in anything I've encountered in 30 years of studying coastal geomorphology. Her team member, a graduate student named Oren Falk, asked the obvious question, "So either the drawings are wrong or there's a cave out there that doesn't fit the models." "Yes," Sorensen said. "One of those is true." She paused. "I'd like to find out which." The team launched on June 2, 2017, in a 24-foot research vessel equipped with sonar, core sampling equipment, and enough provisions for 12 days. Their original itinerary focused on known cave formations along the western shore, cataloged sites with existing survey data. But Sorensen had added a waypoint, a set of coordinates she'd extrapolated from Alicia's drawings, cross-referenced with the tidal data in the notebook, and her own knowledge of the coastline. The coordinates pointed to a section of shore between Kayaker Inlet and the Marble Islands, a stretch of steep forested coastline backed by cliffs of metamorphic rock, heavily eroded at the waterline, indented with dozens of small coves and recesses that appeared and vanished with the tides. A place where a cave could hide in plain sight, visible only when the water dropped low enough and only if you knew exactly where to look. "I told myself I was being scientific about it," Sorensen admitted later, "that I was simply investigating an anomalous data point. But that wasn't entirely true. The truth is, that notebook unsettled me. The precision of it. The way she'd drawn those shapes, not guessing, not imagining, recording. As if she'd already seen what she was drawing and was making a record for someone who would come after her." They reached the western shore on the afternoon of June 3rd. The water was calm, an unusual gift in Glacier Bay, where wind and current conspire to make most days a negotiation. Sorensen checked the tidal charts. The next extreme minus tide, the kind of tide that would expose the deepest cave entrances along the shore, was scheduled for June 5th. A minus 3.8-foot tide occurring at 4:12 a.m. They anchored in a protected cove and waited. 2 days. The longest 2 days, Sorensen would later say, of her professional life. On the evening of June 4th, as the team prepared for the next morning's early survey, Oren Falk asked a question that had been sitting in the boat like an uninvited passenger since they had left Gustavus. "Dr. Sorensen, if we find the cave, if it's real, what exactly are we expecting to find inside?" Sorensen looked at him. Then she looked at the western shore, where the last light was catching the cliff faces and turning them the color of old copper. "Geology," she said. Oren waited. "Just geology," she repeated, quieter now, and turned away from the shore, and did not look at it again until morning. They woke at 3 a.m. to a silence so complete it felt architectural, as if the bay had been deliberately emptied of sound. No wind, no bird call, no wave slap against the hull. Just the slow, enormous breathing of the tide going out. Sorensen checked the depth sounder. The water was dropping fast. By 3:40, the shoreline had changed. Rock shelves and ledges that had been submerged the entire time they'd been anchored were emerging from the water like the bones of something surfacing from sleep. The cliff face, which during normal tides presented as a solid wall of dark stone running straight into the sea, was revealing its secrets. Horizontal fissures, vertical cracks, openings that looked too regular to be natural and too rough to be carved. At 3:58, Oren, who was watching through binoculars from the bow, said, "There." He pointed. Sorensen looked. Roughly 200 yards south of their anchorage, at the base of a cliff section she'd passed twice without noticing anything unusual, a shadow was deepening. Not the ordinary shadow of a recess or an overhang, something with dimension, something with depth. An opening in the rock that was growing as the water receded, revealing itself inch by inch, as if a curtain were being drawn from below. By 4:10, the opening was fully exposed, an arch roughly 8 feet high and 12 feet wide at its base, the stone around it worn smooth by millennia of tidal action, its interior black and absolute. The water inside was still draining, a slow rush of outflow that sounded, Sorensen noted later, disturbingly like exhalation. "That's not on any chart," said the third team member, a research technician named Yuki Tanabe, her voice flat with the effort of keeping it level. "I've checked every survey, every LiDAR pass. That cave is not supposed to be there." "And yet," Sorensen said, "they took the inflatable." Sorensen insisted on going. It was her coordinates, her extrapolation, her responsibility. Oren went with her. Yuki stayed with the boat, monitoring the tide tables, timing the window, 90 minutes, maybe less. The tide had already begun its turn. They motored the inflatable to the cave mouth and cut the engine. The silence reasserted itself, even deeper now, layered with something Oren would later struggle to articulate. "It wasn't quiet," he told an interviewer 3 years after the fact. "Quiet is the absence of sound. This was the presence of silence, like silence was a thing, a substance, and the cave was full of it." Sorensen turned on her headlamp. The beam entered the cave and was swallowed, not reflected, not scattered. Swallowed. The darkness inside had a density she associated with deep water, a feeling of volume, of pressure, of something occupying the space between the walls that was neither air nor stone, but something older than both. They entered. The cave extended inward and slightly upward, the floor rising in a series of natural terraces worn smooth by water. The walls were metamorphic rock. She could see that, could identify the mineral banding, the foliation patterns, but the geometry was wrong. The passage didn't narrow or branch the way erosional caves do. It widened, gradually, symmetrically, as if the rock had been shaped by something with intentions. The walls curved inward at the top, forming a vaulted ceiling that Sorensen estimated at 20 feet, then 25, then higher than her headlamp could reach. "The geometry in Alicia's notebook," Sorensen said quietly. She was right. The proportions, the curve ratios, she was exactly right. They found the ledge 15 feet above the waterline, on the right side of the cave, where the wall stepped back to form a natural shelf roughly 6 feet deep and 20 feet long. It was dry. The stone was warm, not sun-warm, not geothermally warm, but warm the way a living thing is warm, with a faint radiation that Sorensen felt against her face when she climbed up to it. The ledge was empty. Sorensen swept her headlamp across it, looking for evidence, organic residue, tool marks, anything that might indicate human presence. Nothing. Clean stone, worn smooth, unmarked. "We should head back," Oren said from below. He was watching the water. It had stopped draining. The surface in the cave was glass still, but he could feel the tide beginning to reassert itself, a subtle pressure change, a shifting of weight in the water column. "We've got maybe 40 minutes before the entrance closes." Sorensen nodded. She was already descending from the ledge when her headlamp caught something on the ceiling above where she'd been standing. Marks. Not natural mineral patterns, not water erosion. Marks that had been made by something purposeful, carved or etched or pressed into the stone, repeated in a pattern that spiraled outward from a central point, each iteration slightly different from the last, the same shapes Alicia had drawn in her notebook rendered here in stone, at a scale that suggested they'd been made not by a hand holding a tool, but by something else entirely. Sorensen stared at them for 11 seconds. She counted later because her headlamp camera was recording and the timestamp was visible. 11 seconds. In that time, she felt something she would never adequately describe. Not fear, not wonder. Something beneath both, a recognition so deep it bypassed language entirely and landed in the part of the brain that existed before humans had words for anything. The part that knows, without being told, when it is in the presence of something very old. She did not photograph the marks. Her headlamp camera recorded them automatically, but she made no deliberate effort to document them. This was unlike her. Petra Sorensen had spent 30 years meticulously documenting every anomaly she encountered. She'd photographed cave formations on 6 continents. She'd published 47 papers. She did not photograph the marks. When asked about this later, she said, "Some things are not ours to record. I know how that sounds. I know it's not scientific. I don't care." They returned to the inflatable. They motored back to the research vessel. The tide was already rising, the cave entrance narrowing, the water climbing the stone with a patience that felt deliberate. By 5:30 a.m., the opening had vanished. The cliff face was solid again, unremarkable, a wall of dark rock meeting the sea. Yuki asked what they'd found. Sorensen said, "An empty cave." Oren said nothing. That night, unable to sleep, Sorensen reread Alicia's tidal calculations one more time. The next extreme minus tide, a minus 4.1, nearly identical to the one on June 11, 2015, the one Alicia had noted in her journal, was scheduled for June 7th. 2 days away. She told herself she wasn't going back. She went back. June 7th. The tide bottomed out at 4:23 a.m. Sorensen went alone this time. Oren offered to come, but something in her face stopped him from insisting. She took the inflatable, a headlamp, a handheld radio, and nothing else. The cave mouth opened as before, the same slow unveiling, the same exhalation of outflowing water, the same silence with weight and texture. She entered. She climbed to the ledge. Alicia Renault was sitting cross-legged on the stone, braiding her hair. She was thin but not emaciated. Her skin was pale, almost luminous in the headlamp beam, with a quality Sorensen associated with deep-sea creatures, organisms that have adapted to lightlessness that generate their own faint glow. Her clothes were the same ones described in the missing persons report: quick-dry pants, a synthetic base layer, a fleece pullover. They were intact but faded, as if washed 10,000 times. Her hair was long, much longer than 2 years of growth should have produced, falling past her waist, dark and clean. She was braiding it with the unhurried precision of someone performing a daily ritual. Her fingers moved automatically. Her eyes were open, focused on the middle distance, seeing something that existed in the cave but not in the beam of Sorensen's headlamp. When Sorensen's light hit her, Alicia looked up. No flinch, no squint, no startle. She looked at Sorensen the way you look at a clock, checking, confirming, noting the time. "You're early this time," she said. Her voice was clear, conversational. The voice of a woman receiving an expected guest who's arrived before the tea is ready. Sorensen stood at the edge of the ledge, her hand braced against the cave wall, her headlamp illuminating a woman who should have been dead for 2 years, and felt the ground rules of her entire understanding shift beneath her like tectonic plates. "Alicia," she said, "my name is Petra Sorensen. I'm a geologist. People have been looking for you." Alicia considered this. She finished the braid, tied it off with a strip of fabric torn from her sleeve, and set her hands in her lap. "I know," she said. "I could feel them looking. The searching was very loud." She paused. "But they were looking in the wrong place. They were looking in the bay. I'm not in the bay." "You're in a cave in the bay." "No," Alicia said this gently, the way you correct a child who's made a reasonable but fundamental error. "The cave is in the bay. I'm in the cave. It's not the same." Sorensen did not argue. She was aware of the tide, 35 minutes, maybe less, before the entrance sealed, and aware that whatever Alicia meant, extracting her from this ledge was the immediate priority. "Will you come with me?" Sorensen asked. Alicia looked toward the cave's interior, farther in, deeper, where Sorensen's light dissolved into that weighted darkness, and her expression shifted. Not reluctance. Something closer to the face of a woman leaving a house she's loved, knowing she'll never return. "The shepherds said someone would come," Alicia said. "They said it would be a woman. They said she'd carry light." "Who are the shepherds?" Alicia smiled. It was a real smile, warm, specific, carrying the residue of an experience Sorensen would never access. "They tend what grows in the dark," Alicia said. "The things that need time, the things that can't survive in the open." She looked at Sorensen. "I was one of those things. For a while." She stood. Her legs were steady. She moved across the ledge with the ease of someone who knew every contour of the stone. "I'm ready," she said. "The tide is turning." They left the cave together. In the inflatable, in the gray pre-dawn light, Alicia sat in the bow and looked at the water of Glacier Bay as if seeing it for the first time, or the last. She trailed her fingers in the surface and watched the wake with an expression that Sorensen could only describe as tenderness. She did not look back at the cave. By the time they reached the research vessel, the entrance had vanished beneath the rising tide. Alicia Renault was airlifted to Juneau and admitted to Bartlett Regional Hospital. Her physical condition was, in the words of the attending physician, impossible to reconcile with the reported circumstances. She was mildly dehydrated. She had lost approximately 12 pounds. Her vital signs were normal. She showed no signs of prolonged starvation, no muscle atrophy consistent with 2 years of limited mobility, no vitamin deficiencies, no hypothermia damage, no psychological markers of extended isolation or captivity. She was, by every clinical measure, a healthy 26-year-old woman who looked like she'd spent a long weekend outdoors without quite enough water. She could not explain this, or would not. Colleen Renault flew to Juneau within hours of receiving the call. Gage drove to the airport without a coat, the first time anyone could remember him leaving the house improperly dressed for the weather. Theo was already on a plane from Portland before Colleen finished telling him. The reunion took place in a hospital room with fluorescent lights and a window facing the Gastineau Channel. Colleen walked in, saw her daughter sitting up in bed, and stopped in the doorway. She stood there for a long time, long enough that a nurse moved to help her, thinking she might faint. She wasn't fainting, she was listening. "I told you," Colleen said finally, to no one in particular, to everyone in the room, to the water outside the window and the bay beyond it. "I told you she wasn't gone." Alicia opened her arms. Colleen crossed the room. What they said to each other was private. The nurse stepped out. The door closed. Maren Halverson drove to the hospital the next day. She brought Alicia's notebook, the original, retrieved from Colleen's possession, and set it on the bedside table without comment. Alicia looked at it, touched the cover, did not open it. "You checked the tides," Alicia said. It wasn't a question. "I checked the tides," Halverson confirmed, "and you didn't go." A silence opened between them, the kind of silence that holds the shape of a choice not made, a door not opened, a life that continued in its ordinary direction because the alternative was unthinkable. "No," Halverson said. "I didn't go." Alicia nodded. No judgment in it, just acknowledgement. "The shepherd said most people don't," she said. "Most people check the tides and close the laptop and listen to the rain and tell themselves that what they felt wasn't real. That's okay. That's what the dark things are for. The caves, the deep water, the places that hide. They keep what the world isn't ready for. They tend it. They wait." "Wait for what?" Alicia picked up the notebook. She held it the way her mother held the photograph, not as an object, but as a bridge between what was and what is. "For someone who's early," she said. Glacier Bay is still there. The tides still swing through their enormous cycles. The caves still breathe, opening and closing with the water, keeping their secrets in the dark, patient as geology, patient as anything that operates on a timescale beyond human comprehension. Alicia Renault lives in Gustavus now, in a small cabin behind Bridget Tillman's hostel. She works part-time at the park's visitor center, answering questions about kayaking routes and bear safety and tidal patterns. She is calm. She is kind. She does not discuss what happened in the cave, not with reporters, not with researchers, not with the dozens of people who've written to her asking for directions to a place that doesn't appear on any chart. But sometimes, in the evenings, she walks to the dock at Bartlett Cove. She sits where her mother once sat, looking north, across the water toward the western shore. And if you watch closely, if you happen to be there, and you happen to be paying attention, you might see her tilt her head just slightly, the way a person does when they catch a sound at the edge of hearing, something carried on the water, something that might be the tide or the wind or the memory of a place that tends what grows in the dark. She listens. The bay keeps its counsel, and the tide, as it always does, goes out.